the whole thing is kind of off screen, probably because it's,
Oh,
there
there
you
we
go.
All right, well, welcome everyone. We're in the freshly remodeled offices here. Still has the new car smell. So to kick off, as far as the agenda goes, we do need to note that it was the minutes.
It was the minutes. At
Okay.
the end, I had put the next meeting was in April, but it should be March.
Yeah, so just note that for the record that there was that small mistake. Otherwise, do we have any comments on the agenda? So hearing none, we'll call that official. So is anyone from the public wanting to comment?
No, I see no one.
Okay. So that's easy. Board meeting overview. The board met on the 13th. There's a report on the accounting, and the audit has been delayed, which is not ideal, but not a huge deal. They're on track to get right with that. As far as grants in the current federal climate, going carefully on those, making frequent draws every couple of weeks.
I'll give a quick update there, Jim.
Yeah.
So on Friday of last week, ARAPA officially received a notice of termination for that EJ government to government grant. So
Okay.
we're digesting that and figuring out how we want to respond, but we did formally receive that termination notice last Friday.
Okay, and that has to do with Oak Ridge projects.
Mhm.
Okay. The agency requested approval from the board to be able to give public comment to the Oregon Legislature Committee, a hearing about the DEQ budget, and that was approved. When does that happen? Or has it?
So that's the hearings or the testimony that DEQ will be providing in defense of their budget is April 7th, 8th, and 9th, and then the formal public hearing to where ARAPA will submit testimony is April 10th, which is our next board meeting. So I don't think it'll be an in-person testimony, is likely probably going to be in writing and then virtual, if we can facilitate that. But at the very minimum, the written testimony will be submitted.
Okay. Moving on then, the goals were presented, were those in the board?
Yeah.
packet?
Mhm.
Okay. So there's just a general consensus of agreement with the goals as presented. And then Lance did a nice victory lap, on the remodel. So under budget and a few small items to take care of, but really well done. And then as far as the director's report, there's a sort of shortened enforcement list. There are 2 new permit writers. Are they both in that role now?
Yes, one of our permit writers is a woman named Amanda Atkins, who is our permit coordinator. So she has taken a step into the new role of permit writer. So we're really excited about that. I think that her exposure to all of the work that we do from a coordinator primes her really well to be able to jump into the permit writing role and provide us with some good support, since we did have some senior permit writers leave earlier this year. We have another woman joining us April 3rd. Her name is Marcia Miller. She comes from Springfield Wastewater, worked with the EW or the MWMC for a little bit, and then had a bit of some time with the city of Eugene for a while. So she's someone who comes with a lot of regulatory background, but doesn't have the flavor of air component of that regulatory exposure. So she'll be learning that right and quick. And now we're preparing to backfill the permit coordinator position that is now open since that internal hire. And there's another FTE that we will be looking to start to fill in the coming months. The permit coordinator is kind of the focus now. But this other role is trying to find more of an engineering background who can engage on our work with some of the federal changes in people's employment status, that could be an opportunity for maybe us to have someone with real applicable experience to step into our organization, but that is TBD.
Okay. Well, I know Marcia fairly well, so.
Oh, really cool.
Well done. Then there's some discussion about a routine update to the employee handbook.
Paul had a question.
Oh, Paul.
Travis, I couldn't quite understand what you said about the official notification of the federal grant getting canceled. Which grant was that, or was there more than one?
It was just the one, so it's our environmental justice government to government grant is what the, I guess, EPA title for that grant block was. It was a just under $1 million grant effort in Oak Ridge that does more home interventions on homes, such as installing ductless heat pumps from a climate resiliency perspective, some small home repair and modifications for a more defensible, less likely to catch on fire kind of approach, like putting grates on people's vents and stuff, as well as some funding for defensible space within the city of Oak Ridge itself. A lot of funding that exists in terms of forest management or debris management, a lot of those grants are not applicable within city limits because the assumption being that the city is able to take care of those items on their own. In larger municipalities, there may be some truth to that, but smaller places like Oak Ridge, that is a big lift. And they have, I think, a lot more like growth just in the city because they're smaller in general. So some of the funding was designed to help on that aspect. And that funding is, we, up until last Friday, we could bill expenses to that, but from that day, from last Friday forward, no work is approved by the EPA and all activities to be halted.
And was this strictly on environmental justice grounds, or was there a DEI component in the federal government pulling that money?
If you give me a moment, I can pull up kind of the exact language that they said, but hold on, let me snag that. I'll say exactly the language that they use because I don't want to misquote it. So the EPA assistance agreement is terminated in its entirety effective immediately on the grounds that the award no longer effectuates the program's goals or agency priorities. The objectives of the award are no longer consistent with EPA funding priorities.
Okay, thank you.
So it's not just frozen, it's
Gone.
gone.
It's gone. I think that the approaches that we're trying to figure out internally is kind of how we want to respond, how that impacts us internally from a financial perspective, something that we're looking at. That impact looks to be somewhat less of a more minor than otherwise. I think where I have some remiss would be for our sub-award partner with the grant, which was South Willamette Solutions. Part of this grant included a pretty significant amount of funding to that nonprofit for staff time and work to basically do these interventions or run the program over 3 years, which it's right around about $300,000 in support of that nonprofit over 3 years. So pretty significant to them, significant to all of the partners who are included in it. There was a component to the grant, which was a partnership with Lane County Public Health to do some health and morbidity study, which is to look at like existing health data sets like all payers, all claims, or this thing called Essence, or there's a number of health-based data sets. They're going to pull some of that information, take some of LRAPA's air quality information, and then kind of compare the two to essentially, if it's successful in what the project was looking to do, is if we see this much impact from wildfire smoke, we see this much impact on regional health and this much cost to the healthcare system because of that. And that data, I think, could be really helpful from a policy reflection perspective. We're still interested in engaging with Lane County Public Health on trying to further that work regardless, but the funding support lost to it is something we're going to have to reconcile. We don't have answers to that just yet.
And the NGO, was that South Willamette Partners is the NGO. Is that their correct name?
Yeah, so the nonprofit, who was a joint applicant with us was South Willamette Solutions is the name of that nonprofit. And the executive director is Sarah Altimus Pope.
And was that the only NGO that was affected by this?
That was our only, well, and then Lane County Public Health was another subaward under the grant. And we did have a contract with a contractor who was more of a programmatic management role of the grant. That's not a subaward, but just a contract that we'll be canceling also or have canceled as well.
Was there any money issues with reconciliation or all invoices, everything was settled?
The
perfectly?
information that we have is all expenses can be reimbursed up through last Friday, basically,
Okay.
but any expenses beyond that,
Okay.
not.
Was part of that environmental justice grant, was that also wood stove work or not?
It was not wood stove
Okay.
work. We have a targeted airshed grant in Oak Ridge with the same group of people, the same nonprofit that does do some of those wood stove change outs. That work initially started right around 2020 with a targeted airshed grant that we awarded in 2019. And that wood stove focused, but then because of the work that's already underway, which is let's make some modifications on some homes, help them stay warmer in the winter, install a ductless heat pump. A lot of those aligned with a climate resiliency perspective. And so it's not a wood stove focus, but it's still a lot of those same interventions, but from an angle of there's more wildfires in the forest and things are getting hotter. So how can we help the community be resilient in that circumstance?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that wraps the board meeting overview. And so next on the agenda is the election of the chair and vice chair. So we'll open the floor to nominations and you're allowed to nominate yourself.
So Jim and I have been
So-
talking, you guys. And I'm sorry that I missed the last meeting. Things got a little crazy. Sometimes there's unexpected visitors that show up at Wildish and take my attention, but Jim and I had a chance to meet after and I got a little bit more information. And so I would be willing to step into the position if we have the support of the group. So I guess I can self-nominate.
Is that a formal nomination?
Sure, I
believe we need a
I
second.
volunteer. Nominate myself.
Do I hear a second?
I second.
All right. Is there anyone else who'd like to be nominated? Okay. Let's see. Do we need discussion or do we just vote? I think we can just vote. All right. So all in favor for Kelly as chair? Then online. Dan raised his hand.
It's concerning if you can't vote, if you don't vote.
Yeah. Okay, so that's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on then, nominations for vice chair.
Would you?
So Evelina is nominating herself.
I'm nominating
Okay,
myself. I would second.
Kelly seconds. Any discussion? Anybody else want to nominate or be nominated? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to a vote. So all in favor?
Feels wrong.
All right. I missed it. Ben, was that a yes from Ben? Did anybody notice?
No.
Oh,
Ben,
there we
did you
go.
vote?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay, then yes. perfect.
Okay, good. That's unanimous too. All right, well, thank you to both of you.
I have a question regarding the committee.
Yes.
I understand that there are some vacancies still. How many vacancies are there currently?
So our board or our CTV, the Citizen Advisory Committee, can have at most 15 seats on it. We really strive to have at least one seat filled from the number of groups or categories within. So there's industry that's represented,
Sure.
there's public health, there's a wildfire component, which Chris Klein holds that stake. members of the public, and then an agricultural seat as well. So our drive is to have one of those seats filled for all, and then the ample seats are kind of up to 15 is our
Yeah.
upper limit.
So how many currently are 8 absent?
We have
Is there-
9 now.
So
So six.
six potential vacancies for just public.
For public, but some of those others any of
Could
those
also.
categories are
Okay.
open, yep.
And then also for the budget committee, is there?
The budget committee, we have 4 vacancies.
Yes.
Okay.
The way that there is a little bit of a difference in how well, not necessarily. So the board appoints people to the budget committee as well as the CAC. We have a structure now where we can take an applicant for either the CAC or the budget committee. Historically, the board has oftentimes taken a little bit more of a go out and identify a specific person who they feel has a financial role that can fill that need. But more recently, because of some of the challenges in filling some of those seats, the board has opened up to more of a who would like to apply if there is interest and extend that opportunity farther that direction.
Okay.
So if you know anybody,
That is my thought, and I was also thinking of, are there going to be, I understand that you may be leaving.
I will be leaving at the end.
At the end of the year, so you won't serve out your full term.
Well, my term is ended after this meeting.
Oh, really? I thought you were on until 27.
No, it's a 1-year
Okay.
post, so.
Oh, I
What do you
mean,
mean?
Oh, the
Yeah,
chair,
member.
right. I
Oh,
was
it's a
chair.
member. That's right. There would be a vacancy, although there's 3 industry, all 3 of us are industry reps. So that's filled. I think they would, I'm sure the committee would accept more in industry too. If
okay, thank you.
anyone applied. But yeah, we would welcome public.
Mhm.
Okay. So, we'll move on now to our discussion of the enforcement data. I was thinking to start off, maybe we could firm up the goals of this. I mean, Travis, you had some interest in looking at it, as I recall.
Yeah, I think some context that I think is important to provide here to the board too is, for one, I've been waiting on, so you're looking at what's been attached, something we've recently started attaching to the CAC agenda. And I think this was a good addition, and we'll continue with this effort, is attaching the director's report. So this week I've been adjusting, not so much the information that's in here, but a little bit of how it's structured and how it's presented. Because the board approved our goals, LRAPID's goals in the last board meeting, I'm wanting to adjust how this information is displayed to more directly align with those goals. So here's a goal, and then here's some data that's related to that goal that can be looked at as some of the metrics and how well we're achieving that. So the director's report will look different next go around for the CAC to review. But I think what I have heard from the CAC is some interest on the enforcement components of the director's report and how we display that information and what data does LRAPA have, and are we displaying all that would be good to display, and in what way are we displaying it. I think that from an industry perspective, there is some reflection or some questions about if one person complains every single day for a whole month, that could, from an optics perspective, look really interesting to the public that a particular source has a lot of complaints on it. So in the way that we're sharing this information, is that a helpful way, or is there some improvement that could be seen from that? And then even from a public perspective, in looking at the enforcement data, what's in there and the detail of it, is that scratching the itch of, I would like to know what is taking place, or is it too much? Is it like it's a couple pages of stuff to read through, and maybe paring it down could be helpful? And so that's where some of that reflection from the CAC of what's going to hit the need for industry, what's going to hit the need for the public, I think could be a real productive use of the CAC's time and feedback that would be really valued by us.
Well, with that in mind, let's start, say, with industry perspective, if you guys have any thoughts, and then we'll do the same thing with general public. So I know that I look at LRAP information, but I also look at DEQ enforcement every month when they do their notice, just to see where enforcement is headed. At least as far as DEQ goes, there's certain categories that you can tell there's more enforcement effort going to that kind of thing. And I don't know, I find that mildly useful to keep in mind.
In like what way, could you elaborate a little more?
Well, like, for example, underground storage tank violations are pretty common, and DEQ typically will do an inspection of the facility at least once every 3 years, whereas, say, stormwater is much more hit or miss. So when I'm managing between these permits, I really think, make sure you hit everything on underground storage tank, because in a few years they're gonna be here. You still put enforcement effort in stormwater, but it just helps guide your
Which
attention.
work on first, yeah.
If that makes sense.
Mhm.
So similarly with LRAP, it seems like asbestos violations are fairly common, and that affects my decision making when it comes to hiring an abatement company or doing asbestos issues.
That's helpful, thank you.
Do you have any thoughts, either of you?
I do not. I have not noticed much impact that it would have on what we do. But I mean, I'm always interested in seeing kind of what trends are happening and just keeping up with
Yeah.
it. But
Trends is good.
stormwater, I follow quite closely because there's some, significant impacts with industry that kind of make the news, right? Whether like in Portland, and the sewage plant recently was an interesting one. It got a lot of coverage, even though apparently it happens many times a year. So I kind of pay attention to that stuff.
Yeah.
I have a question. The violations, are they based on complaints or inspections or visit inspections?
That's valid. So when we receive a complaint, that does not initiate an enforcement effort in any way, shape, or form. We, as an organization, are really interested in hearing complaints from individuals, be it a member of the public or another industry source or whoever. Mostly from if someone's taking the time to reach out to ARAPA and say, from an air quality perspective, I am negatively impacted and I want the government to know about that. That has value, even just writing that notation down. And with many complaints, that can sometimes be where it ends, because we can receive complaints where we don't have any regulatory authority over it. As an example, there can be a odd fragrant smell of like laundry detergent in a residential neighborhood. Is that a need for us to go jump into an industry space and start to like engage in enforcement? Yeah, maybe, maybe not, but it's still notable to us that that took place, especially if then we see a trend that like we have a lot of people reporting the same thing. That provides us a reason to do a little bit of a second dig. When we have a complaint, that is, if someone complains and says, I think that it was this particular source, this business that's creating this odor issue, we take that. It doesn't officially attach that complaint to that source, but we go through and we will decide if we want to suspect that that source may have been the cause of it. And a lot of times that looks at what was the time that it was happening, what was the general wind flow of the direction, and then even a call out to the source to say, was there anything special or weird going on at your location at this time and place? And if the answer is yes, actually, we had an upset emission or something along those lines, we can say, pretty sure that this complaint was associated with those items. So it can be the start of follow-up questions that can uncover some issues of non-compliance. At that point, it's referred to our inspectors who are doing that work will refer that information to the enforcement manager, to the enforcement department, and it's decided to move forward with an enforcement action or otherwise. So they can lead to, but they certainly are not directly connected.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Good to know.
So on that note, something that might prove useful
Mhm.
in the future, maybe not, but it might be interesting to see is how was this discovered? Was it was it a regular inspection? just by LRAPA staff? Was it a public complaint? Was it self-reporting? That could be useful for tracking.
Yeah, so one of the things I'll say too, and when I said the director's report is going to get some shifting. The enforcement actions detail report, which is the one that has all the language. At this point, there's no planned overhauls to that information. Part of the reason why for that is our program that we use to track this information is an old program from the 90s. And we'll be outgrowing it here before too long, but this runs this report, and so this is how that shares the report, but we can modify it beyond that. So what I'm hearing kind of, Kelly, is you as a potential idea is in this data and this enforcement detail report, which will still be the same, and just to present it as an attachment to the director's report, is a new item line, like an E, that's source or cause, or I don't know how we would phrase it, but the thing that initiated or led to us taking this enforcement action.
I think the public would like to see if, Rapid is just doing regular inspections and it was found. I think it would also be beneficial if people are self-reporting, would be, showing the due diligence of.
Yeah, I like that, because it can be too, from the public's perspective. We have heard, feedback has been sometimes that we file a complaint, we don't feel like anything's being done or any actions being taken, and that can not feel well to people sometimes. As where that data can demonstrate more fully, like here is a complaint that led to this recognition that improvement could be had, and so now we're engaging on enforcement side of things. But then also to the industry side of things, it could potentially be helpful to say, hey, listen, we're being transparent and mistakes are inevitable, and we found that this was a mistake, and we want to make sure people are aware.
Yeah. Well, and also from our survey of permitted sources, we know that there were some comments feeling like there was too much enforcement on small companies and not enough attention to larger companies. So that extra bit of transparency maybe would help with that perception.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, unless there's any other thoughts, we could shift to talk about public information then around the same questions. Do you have any thoughts?
Is Paul a member of the public, or is he?
He's a committee member.
Okay, is he a public?
Oh,
member?
yes.
Yes.
Let's go to Paul first.
I don't really have anything.
Okay.
Do you feel like you get all the information that is of interest to you?
Yes.
How do you feel, Paul, is like the density of the information, like going through this director's report and trying to make some adjustments? My intent is to take a bit of a less is more approach, and you can overwhelm people so much where if there's this huge pack of stuff, then the reaction could be like, I'm not going to read all of that. So how can, from a condensing things in a concise way, can it be actually helpful or useful? The level of detail there, is it too much, too little, or is it kind of right where you think would be needed?
For me, it's right about, where it's needed. For me, for others in the community, it may be overwhelming, but I think it's about right.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts about the table that lists the complaints for the month? As Travis mentioned, how we had talked before about if there's a frequent complainer, is there a good way to reflect that, or should we be interested in reflecting that?
Like having a column that actually specified.
This table here for the complaints is, I think, we're looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so in this packet, it's complaints received February 1st to February 28th. So like, for example, there's 15 industry complaints in total, but 10 of them are for International Paper. And I think it's a valid question to say how many of that are coming from one member of the public. Is that useful to know to both public and industry? Or is that, I don't know, does that put an unfair taint on the information? Any thoughts?
I've got some thoughts, not on that in particular. First of all, I think the tables are really a good source of information, really encouraging to see that year after year that complaints under various things have gone down, outdoor burning, dust, way below what they used to be. Regarding the actual listing of the enforcement, to me, particularly industrial enforcement, I would like a little bit more detail on that to say, for instance, the IP, what exactly was the emission that was enforced? Probably something like a cabinet shop, you could almost assume it was probably paint or varnish odor. But I still think that some of that stuff might be very useful. Asbestos, the burning, outdoor burning, it's interesting to know. I saw that this month mentioned, well, this was plastics and this was, metal debris and garbage and cans. I mean, it's interesting to know what it is. So I feel I could use a little bit more information on it.
So I hear kind of the feedback from you is on the industry sources specifically, a little bit more detail to like, well, what was that permit condition that was not being met?
Yes.
That type of more detail there, but that level of detail just specific to those regulated industry sources.
I would say so. Like, for instance, IP, I've past month, I've smelled them 4 or 5 times, and I live 12, 13 miles away from them. So I think they're putting a lot of sulfur into the air, and I think it should be noted just that is sulfur, or is that sulfur dioxide?
It's a TRS, which is total release sulfur is what it stands for. And it is one of those items where it is a stinky item, and what goes in the air is very notable. But yeah, TRS is what that odor that you're smelling, that's international paper, is called TRS.
So is that sulfur dioxide, or is what?
That's in a weeds question that I'm gonna have to refer to the operations folks on that one. I'm not sure.
But sulfur dioxide's a danger.
Okay.
Right.
I would go back to your initial, and I think it would be fairly easy to do. It reminds me kind of at Dogami with similar type tracking. They would just call it unique complainants. So if it was 10 from international paper and it was 7 unique complainants, and so you could kind of keep a total of, and that would distinguish, it would still off track it, but it would be able to differentiate of the 30, 27 were unique, 3 were repeat.
Yeah,
person,
well,
or something like that.
Without
Like,
calling out, yeah.
without calling
I
out.
like the terminology there, because there's no value judgment assigned with that sort of terminology. It's just, unbiased.
So the
Might be worth
idea being
considering.
is a potential modification could be, so like, let's say, for example, there was a source and we had 30 complaints on that source, one a day, every day for a whole month. And if that all came from the same individual or same residence, on here it would be, here's the source, 30 complaints, and then of unique complaints, 1. And so that would allow anybody who's interested to see that it's this one singular complainant.
It makes a big difference if it's 1 house versus 30 houses though. So I do see the value in being able to distinguish between that.
And I would say that our reaction to a circumstance of one complainant complaining 30 times over a month would look different than 30 unique complainants
Agreed.
complaining on the same source over a month.
Perfect. Yeah, it might be worth. Yeah, I like that.
As far as the burning complaints, that can really affect the neighborhood. And for the public to see that open burning complaints are responded to, I think is beneficial too. There's been times in the past when I've heard people talk about just among themselves with that. I said, well, there is this agency you can call.
that tends to be for complaints. The outdoor burning, neighbor burning is probably right, like one of the most frequent that we'll
Yeah.
see come in.
But I bet there's a lot more discussion that doesn't lead to an actual complaint
Right.
out there.
I do think just in general, neighbors who have good relationships with one another and can engage with one another before needing to bring in a third party is a healthy relationship. And sometimes there can be instances where I think our feedback to people is, well, that's outside our regulatory scope. And so we really recommend you just develop a relationship with your neighbor. That sort of thing.
Right?
Well, yeah, but there are circumstances.
Yeah, well, I mean, if there is something that is definitely, like for outdoor burning would be a violation of Title 47, and certainly we have a stake in the role to, be involved and participate in whatever finding a resolution.
So I do like the idea on the industry, separating that out a little bit, odor versus dust versus like a fairly simplified chart, but because, well, the other ones are a little bit more intuitive, like what was the, right? And what you're talking about, Mike, is that like outdoor burning is gonna be the smoke or like that type of thing, but industry does have a little bit more variety
Yeah.
of what is the complaint, so that's not a bad idea to
So
pull that out a little bit.
can you like elaborate a little more? I don't think I'm quite totally understanding.
I guess for me, when I see one complaint against St. Vincent de Paul, I would have no idea. Was that a smell? Like what is, you know what I mean? Like what was it saying? Was it
the-
track
the
or was it
glass
dust? Was it
Or
odor?
mattress
Was it
plates or-
It was the burning of mattress.
Oh, so, okay.
Yeah.
But I guess that would, you
Yeah.
can't look at that and have any idea of
Especially
what.
for someone like St. Vincent de Paul, where you think of
Yeah,
like,
I guess you should always, dig a little bit, but if you were just trying to present like, what is our community really, what is bothering them the most and being able to differentiate that might be helpful.
Well, do you non-industry folks, are you aware that all those permits are available on the El Rapa website to look at if you ever want to?
No, I wasn't really, but like I said, I'd certainly be more interested in when they're violated than whether they're permitted.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
the
if they're
question is,
If they're impermitted, then that's,
yeah, well, I guess
That's
part of
all.
my thought here, I'm bringing this up, is if a person did want more detail, I don't know if you'd want to go so far as say which condition was violated. And a person could go look and see what that condition actually says without loading up a lot of extra verbiage in this summary.
I think I'd rather see it in the summary myself.
I could see a summary of the condition, but if you also list the condition number, if someone was so inclined, they could look at that.
I would, just knowing sometimes a permit condition can be a subpart of a permit condition.
Yeah.
And it can get really kind of complicated. And so I think in hearing the feedback in my mind is it would be a little bit of a, here's this permit condition that was violated and just a list of what that is. And then if there is follow-up question, El Rapa can be prepared on more of a one-on-one to dig into that. Or it could motivate someone who has a little bit more of a technical capacity to pull up that permit if they're really interested and start to dig into it. But the notion of how to concisely summarize what a permit violation might look like on the enforcement report could be, I think, a big challenge. And the enforcement manager would be like, what? That's a huge thing.
Yeah, there's
But
a
just
lot of nuance.
listing the specific permit violations or components that were violated, I think that's a worthwhile idea. The conversation with the enforcement, with Colleen, our enforcement manager, becomes when do we actually start to put that information in the enforcement report? Because sometimes in that enforcement engagement, we can say, well, we believe that there was a permit violation of this condition. And then the response from the source can say, well, actually, here's this information that shows that we were not out of compliance. And then that can affect or change what things we're identifying in our issuing an enforcement action. So the follow-up question is, at what point do we feel confident enough in those permit condition violations that we're then ready to publish them externally? So I think that there's a lot of value in that. So now the task is for us is to figure out if that's feasible and then where is it most feasible for us to take a
It
step.
is kind of a fraught circumstance, I can see how it could. You'd certainly want to tread carefully.
And it's more from it is trying to be recognized that this is a public document. And it does receive a lot of public review, as it should, we're grateful for. But just want to be sure that that information that we're talking about is business and we're speaking publicly, that we're confident in those items. And so that way, any reflections of hesitancy from the source and that information being published, they can also be affirmed that they're like, nope, this is what we agree was the issue and we're ready to respond to it in that public forum if needed.
I think you could just put an alleged before it, couldn't you?
That's good.
That is true. There's difference between complaint and then a set of violation, right?
Yeah.
So,
Although,
Especially because complaints could come in over things that you guys don't even have authority. So is that reflected?
Yeah, no,
That's
so-
not gonna be reflected in here though, right? If somebody had like, Knife River had a stormwater runoff and they called you, would you you wouldn't document?
No,
it,
that would,
probably.
we would recognize that as that's not an
Okay.
air thing. If someone came in and said, hey, we think that Knife River is doing this, that, the other from an air
Right,
perspective,
okay.
we in our, is this something that we want to be sure we assess or say, no, this is a Knife River item, we go through that reflection. And it doesn't by direct connection lead to enforcement. I think the complaints and enforcement are two separate things.
Yep.
The complaints can kind of inform and begin an enforcement reflection, but they're not directly related.
So 16 unknown, again, without delving into it.
Those.
Those are probably.
It's kind of a lot.
Those are more of the ones that we still want to track public engagement because we're taking staff time to like take a call or review email and stuff. That may not really be something we can act on. We just got one today on, if you're familiar with what chemtrails are. Someone had concerns about chemtrails, had brought that to our office. I spent some time crafting a response and sending it back. We still log it as like, we did receive a complaint on this, but it's unknown because it's really not in our purview, right? Like, it's like, it's not, we respect the person's concern. We help direct them to the appropriate channel, which in that case is the EPA, for those kind of concerns. But we don't want to not log it because there is, we've had to, you know, we put some energy and effort into that. I
Yeah.
believe that's the
No,
unknown bucket.
That's right, yeah.
So 17 and 62 though are kind of
Yes, the.
the correct word to
Yeah,
use.
a little more
Okay.
perhaps insight could be valuable, but our things, as another kind of example, we have recently had some complaints of a laundry detergent smell. That was in their neighborhood and from us. We don't actually know what created that potential issue, and so
Or
that's.
cheap cologne was
Yeah,
another
the
word
cheap
used.
to document it, but it's not a lot. You can do it for follow.
It's sometimes it was a smell that you smelt and the smell's no longer there and
What do
if
you
we
do?
had been there to smell it ourselves, maybe we could have some insight, but there is a bit of a ambiguity sometimes to just the nature of odor, which is why when we engage with community too, we say that we don't regulate odor
Yeah.
because it is so subjective. We regulate processes, we regulate emissions, we regulate objective things that you can measure. And odor is not so subjective, and that is where it gets a little bit challenging
But
sometimes.
to piggyback on that, to live in our day and age where there was a Reddit thread that was created and this group really got into it and they were telling each other, contact El Rapa. And so we kind of
That's
had
why
this
so
like,
many.
yeah, I can't say all of them, but you know, this is where people want to mobilize. And in this
Right.
instance, those that did contact us after saying, oh, I'm on this Reddit thread, you're like, darn it, because you know, we're not gonna be able to help resolve this in a meaningful way for you. And we have been keeping tabs and trying to pay attention. We have had staff go out and kind of poke around, but the number of variables for that are like almost like too many to.
We do, like on that particular odor of, I'm smelling like what is like cleaning supplies. We have some thoughts on what that could be and some follow-up questions that we are asking of where it may be. So it's not like we passively just take them, but they are difficult and can sometimes be time consuming to really nail down.
I remember the medical marijuana stuff and recreational marijuana grows That when that initially happened, there were a lot of odor.
We still do get a number of
You
complaints.
still get a
about
number
it,
of
too.
Especially when they're.
That makes
full
sense,
of-
okay.
Yeah.
Is Northwest Natural monitored at all for emissions?
Northwest Natural, they don't have a direct permit with us, but they do have some that's more of a. There are components, not Northwest Natural directly, but natural gas emissions are something that we keep track of. Under EPA regulatory perspective is that natural gas is seen as a biogenic source, so there's less regulations over that than what you may see for other things. But usually when it comes to like emergency generators and other type items, that's where some of that natural gas regulation comes from, but them specifically, they don't have a.
Well, let me just kind of check in on the process. Is this sort of brainstorming, getting what you were hoping for?
Yeah, so I think an outcome of what we can do is we can take some of this feedback that we have heard. We can come back to the CAC with here's what we think is like feasible, and here's what we think would be challenging, and here's what this is like not something that we can pull off in the current circumstance. And that can lead us to a discussion with the CAC. And then I think that really what the end game will be is the CAC puts together a recommendation to the board on how the board would like to direct staff to make some modifications to this information.
Okay. So say for next meeting, hear back from staff on how these ideas might be implemented. Okay, and then we could put together something for the board report.
Travis, do you feel like you'd have a template or, some example of what it could look like?
I think
of
we
what
can. I mean, it's
do, or-
what's actually nice is this director's report is under some changes right now as we speak. And so this is an opportunity to make some adjustments to that. I think the next meeting, we will just look over the new director's report in general. We can give more focus on the enforcement and complaint side of things and have maybe some things to look at, or this isn't going to work because of whatever reason.
Sure. Paul?
Yes, Travis, you mentioned that, on the industrial emissions, I think you referred to it as TSF, total sulfur components. Was that correct?
Total release sulfur, TRS.
TRS, okay. But LRAPA does not regulate odors directly, right?
Correct. Yep.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay, so that total release sulfur, since a component of that out of international paper would be, of course, the methyl mercaptan, but that would be included in the total release sulfur, right?
You're getting into weeds that I'm not a subject matter expert in, so presumably yes, but our approach for regulating odor is we regulate the processes and the procedures and then the emission amount. So that is our angle. If we have a lot of odor complaints, an example being back in 2005, we received in a year, it was about 300 odor complaints on JH Baxter. And so that provided us with regulatory might to declare JH Baxter as a suspected nuisance. And then we were able to enter into a best work practice agreement, which we were able to have them install some pollution control devices, an evaporator on site, and change some of their processes, which they willingly agreed to. But that's the structure and approach for odor regulation, is we receive enough feedback from the community to where we feel in a courtroom setting, you could say, that have a strong enough of an argument to obligate a business to make changes to their processes or procedures.
Mm-hmm. So the odor complaints, those are kind of just an indicator of where to look.
Exactly.
Even though LRAP is not regulating odors directly.
Yep, we can follow up and we can ask more questions of a source. We can say, we had a complaint for a bunch of smoke coming out of your stack at this date and this time. We're really interested in looking at all the records that our permit requires you to keep so we can see what was taking place. And if we discover non-compliance in that review, then we can initiate enforcement. And then we can ask a follow-up question. That's why weren't you examining this and self-reporting when this took place. So it's really a helpful tool. We really value that feedback and those complaints from the community. Sometimes it can be frustrating if we're in a place where we regulatorily can't really do anything about it, other than just log that this person was inconvenienced by whatever the issue may be. But it does lead us to ask follow-up questions of our sources specifically, because otherwise we inspect a source once per permit term, which most permits are a 5-year permit. So without some of those complaints driving us to want to have another follow-up with a source, we might not actually be there for an inspection, but once per 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And just as an aside, I'll note in looking at the calendar year comparing 2025 to previous years, looks like the outdoor burning complaints are on a nice downward trend, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's hard to really explain what some of those changes can be. I do think, and this is an observation more from Oak Ridge, but I think that people being exposed to really bad air quality from wildfire smoke has people more sensitive to smoke in general. And so I do, and this is me just kind of assuming, but my assumption is that there's more recognition that the smoke is undesirable and less interest in you making as much smoke as before. But I don't have anything tangible to really stand on with that perspective. It's just a notion that I have.
So ACDPs are once per permit term.
That's
The
what
Title V is once a year.
Title V, if there's FCE components, which is a full compliance evaluation requirement, and our Title V sources, we have much more hand-in-hand relationship, and so we tend to be on Title V properties a lot more in general. But like a standard or even a simple ACDP, at very least once per permit term, our goal is to get that inspection.
Okay. Well, let's move on to roundtable. Start with the remote folks first. Ben, do you have anything on your mind? Okay.
No.
How you been?
Good. Yeah. It's crazy times, but enjoying the sun today.
Anything you want to bring up?
No.
Okay. Well, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Paul?
No, I don't have anything.
Okay, thank you. So then in the room, I'll save you for last so you can maybe get more of a sense of, this is just a period when you can bring up anything you want. So I don't have any share.
I don't either. So I will just keep this brief since Chris isn't here to join us, but representative from the Forest Service at the McKenzie Watershed Council a couple weeks ago was telling us about some of the cuts and right, and how on paper it, you know, they've gotten rid of an incredible amount of the administrative staff, and even though they're stating that the firefighters are being kept, there's a lot of concern internally, because if you don't have administrative staff to be coordinating housing and food and trailers and transportation, we could be in trouble. So that is something that, unless something changes, this wildfire year could be really bad. So that's all I kind of know, and hopefully we'll get an update from Chris, but that's a good point that I hadn't, you know.
I will say, just kind of along that as an aside, some of the cuts that have taken place for the National Weather Service, from a state perspective, there's a lot of collaboration between DEQ, LRAP included, local public health, Oregon Health Authority, ODOT, and the National Weather Service to say, here's the fire, where's the smoke going, who do we need to alert and say that, hey, smoke's coming your way. The National Weather Service has filled a large role in helping to engage on that forecast future potential opportunities. Will they as an entity be able to be plugged in on the state level this wildfire season go around? That's a to be determined question, but related. So
How about with inversions too? Similar?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, to the same degree, like, if the National Weather Service has less of a capacity to forecast for weather conditions that have impact on the communities to which they're serving, there will be less service related to that. When it comes to, like, in the Midwest, issuing tornado warnings and other things, that's a big deal. I was having some reflections when we had our flood warnings recently with all of the rain that we had a couple weekends ago. That was Portland's National Weather Service office that was issuing that. So their capacity to engage and make sure that they're issuing those advisories or warnings as needed, presumably, is lesser with less resources available to them, but time will tell, I guess.
Okay. Well, we're adjourned a few minutes early.
Mike, I had one other,
Oh, sorry.
one other basic question that I'm sure Travis can answer for us. What has the conditions of the air quality been over time in the area? Because I know we've changed a lot of people are no longer heating with wood, but I mean, in the general Lane County area, how are we doing?
Very well in the terms that air quality is going down. And the motivating
Pollutants.
for pollutants.
The numbers are.
Sometimes my brain leaves potholes in the words that I use, and the words that fall out are really important ones. But yes, pollutants are on the decline. There is an exception though. So under the Clean Air Act, there are these things called criteria pollutants. There's 6 pollutants. The one in our area that we care about is particulate matter, so smoke, and then ozone. The EPA lowers health standards over time to say everybody has to beat this line. We, aside from Oak Ridge, a few years back, we're all meeting those health standards. The EPA in this year or last year lowered that health standard for PM2.5 again. The current federal administration is reflecting on the need for that lowering and if it might be fine for it to go back to where it was, and the next step down isn't necessary. But meeting that line, all of Lane County is. However, I think an important thing to make note of,
The asterisk.
yes, is wildfire smoke exceeds that health standard. But then we as a regulator, one of the work that LRAPA does is we go to the EPA and we say this data of it being above the line, don't count this data against the community because the community can't really control it. So we're meeting health standards, but the lived experience of Lane County community citizens and residents are above that health standard. So it's we can pat ourselves on the back, but are we meeting that need of protecting people and avoiding exposure to harmful pollution? Not necessarily.
One other thing I'd like to share with the group, if you could please mark your calendars for May 8th. May 8th, we'll be doing a open house here. It'll be the day of the board meeting, but it'll be immediately following the board meeting. We'll be doing a ribbon cutting. It also is Air Quality Awareness Week, so we'll be kind of doing that. We'll be bringing in alumni and friends from across the community to come and celebrate with us. There'll be light hors d'oeuvres, some type of dessert, drinks, a chance to kind of see the space without boxes and furniture still kind of crammed in on nooks and crannies. And part yeah, there'll be rooms in the back. But we would love to have everyone from the CAC that is available to join us. So again, May 8th, roughly 2 o'clock to 4:30. You don't have to be here right at 2 unless you love ribbon cuttings, then you want to be here at the beginning. Yeah. But if you know folks that you think should come, we want to open it to the community. We are a community-owned agency. You know, we're here at the discretion of Lane County residents, and we want to make sure they know we're here and we're doing that. And we'd love to have you all here.
Yeah, we appreciate it. So, we'll be here.
Yes, and on the CAC meetings, we now have an ability to have in-person gatherings. We will continue to keep the virtual component available and accessible, but I really encourage all of us to, if we can, and the drive across town is feasible, have an in-person engagement, because I think that the meetings are way more productive and more engaging with we're all in the same room, so.
For sure.
I think that there's a component of how might we be able to up the ante on those who participate in person. So we're having thoughts on how we might hit that mark. So.
All right. So now we're adjourned.
Your follow, thanks, Ben.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.